My name is Anita Burchfield, and I'm from Madison, Alabama. I am here. We've attended the First Baptist Church of Pigeon Forge GFI conference on the Exchange Life. I first came to know these truths of the Exchange Life back in 1986. So it's been a journey, but I'll back up a little bit where I came from. I grew up in Arkansas, the next youngest of 4 girls. My mother was from South America, and we lived in a small town that was quite prejudiced. And here we were, 4 little, really brown little girls in a small town where racially things were very separated. And here we were kind of, people didn't really know what to do with us. My father was American, but he soon abandoned our family. And my sisters and I and my mom were kind of taken under a church's wing. My mother became very active in a church there in that town. And the church was very loving and very supportive, but, you know, my mom was doing the best that she could, being from another country, not a lot of education. But she was a vivacious woman, and she was well loved by everybody who came in contact with her. But because we had no father in the home, and my mother had to work all the time, she worked a lot trying to support us. We didn't get any support from my father. We didn't have a parent at home, and you know, like I'm sure a lot of stories go, we raised ourselves basically. She provided all of our necessities and the parenting that she could. But you know, coming from where she came from, her mother died as a child. She basically had no parents. Her father left her with relatives. And so when she met my father, who was 17 years older than she was, it was a way out of her life, and she came to the States. So here we are, you know, a small family in a small town where most people were not divorced. We were just really kind of unusual, and my sisters and I just kind of started fighting for our place in our little town and our place in our lives. And we grew up not just without support of a nuclear family, a supportive family, but we each began looking for life outside of, you know, for something, a place to belong. You know, just like we've learned in the conference, a place to belong, a place of security. And all 4 of us went kind of in different directions, but they were all bad directions. You know, as children, if we suffer from in whatever type of dysfunction that we are raised in, as children, we have no control over our lives. You know, we're just pushed into a pit. But then we get of an age where we realize we have some control, and if we choose to, we jump in those pits by ourselves, and that's what I did. I was looking for, you know, the love and security, and at a young age, I was sexually abused by several older teenage boys and a family friend, and at the time, I didn't see that necessarily as a negative thing because I was so hungry, you know, for love and affection. And it became a source of empowerment to me for myself. And as I grew older, I started seeking out relationships with, you know, that you know, you hear that, you know, girls are looking for love and guys are looking for sex. And, you know, I just went from relationship to relationship for years. Ultimately, I got pregnant at 16 and had an abortion at 17. I had worked my way through middle school and high school shoplifting, you know, to get some of the nicer things in life because we were very, very poor. Just, you know, I had an eating disorder. I don't know, I was telling my friends I've forgotten a lot of things that I actually experienced in my life. They're no longer part of my life, you know, but I've actually forgotten things until in talking with someone else I go, oh yeah, I did that, you know, I experienced that. So, you know, my life as a child was like a lot of stories. You know, it's just kind of different people, different places, but, you know, many children suffer the same kind of heartache and trauma. But we all kind of go different ways. Some of us get stronger, some of us get self-sufficient, some of us get independent, some of us turn to depression or drugs and alcohol. You know, we find our outlets that we think is the answer. And I grew up in church, in this small church that we that kind of took us under our wing. I grew up in this church. My mother was never able to attend church with us because she worked in the nursery for extra money. So we generally, once we realized we could, we started skipping church. So that was kind of my experience through church. I made a profession of faith when I was preteen, but it wasn't a heartfelt, life-changing profession. Intellectually, I agreed with what I had learned about Jesus Christ and God, but it was more my teachers. Everybody else in my 6th grade class had made profession of faith. My teachers just basically said, you have to do this. You know, it's kind of like their check-off list of success as teachers. But, you know, it didn't take, so to speak. And I continued my pattern of seeking security and love and worth in other areas. In college, my last year of college, I had really kind of gotten sick of my lifestyle. I'd just gotten sick of going from one relationship to another. I'd gotten sick of being concerned, was I going to be pregnant this month or whatever. I was just empty, and I had decided that I'm done with guys. I'm going to go back to church. And I did. I went back to church, and there was a young man there that caught my eye, and we were married 5 months later. We were not married for the right reasons, you know, but I do believe that God brought us together. You know, we're still married here. And that's part of my story is that, you know, I was still seeking security. I was still seeking someone who loved me. I was still seeking the affection of that male, you know, that male person. And my husband, the young man that caught my eye, was very stable. He was very secure. He had come from a real strong family home. They weren't believers, but it was a good home. So far different from my home. And I just took like a moth to flame, you know, because here I was in my last year of college and I had nowhere to go. I really had no idea what I wanted to do. You know, my identity was, all the relationships I'd been in, my identity was my athletic ability or my popularity, you know, like so many people. You know, my identity was whatever I could make it that fit the needs of the time. You know, you hear some people are chameleons. That's what I was. And, you know, all along, I was so numb to my emotions all through those years, not even realizing that I was. But I remember people talking about their feelings, and I just remember I couldn't identify my feelings. Now, that doesn't say I had no feelings, because I was an emotional basket case all the time. You know, there were just these ups and downs, and I lived so much out of what people thought about me, and I lived so much out of trying to please people, you know, trying to stay on people's good side. I didn't want to make people angry. People thought I was the most patient person in the world because I was so agreeable. But, you know, it was out of that need for people's approval. Mm-hmm. So Dave and I got married. And after we'd been married several years, I became very unhappy as he focused more on his work. We had a couple of kids. I started feeling faceless, and I started feeling, just unhappy because he was not making me happy. You know, the 5 months of dating that we had before we got married in the first year of marriage, you know, it's all excitement and lust and, you know, and the feelings that you think are love, or that I did, you know, turned pretty serious once the kids started coming and his job started changing, and he became a little more ambitious and more focused on that, and here I was still trying to live as the independent super person that I wanted everybody to think I was. I took away his position, I'll say, as father, in not in an aggressive way, but just I hid everything from him, just like I had tried to hide everything from everybody about myself. I would try to handle all the parenting things so that he was never bothered, because I didn't want to be irritated, because I would take it personally. And he was a different person back then. He was not a believer, and so there were struggles there relationally. So anyway, after several years, I had decided that he was not going to make me happy. I'd gone through my periods of time where I had my crying moments and crying weeks, and demanding that he love me and show me affection and all the things that many women desire. And he would do his best for a little bit, but, like most men, that lasts so long if it's not coming from the heart. And the more I tried to cling, the more he withdrew, and eventually, we both built up walls, and I just said, I'm done with this. My mother raised 4 children by herself. I have 2 kids. I know he's a good man. He's not going to be like my father and abandon us and not give us any support. I know that he would give us support. And I was really making plans to leave. I had been unfaithful to him, but he did not find out about that. I just had decided, this is not the way I'm going to leave this marriage. I ended the relationship and just thought, if I'm going to end this relationship, it's going to be because of our relationship, not because of another relationship. The disintegration of what's going on here. I'm trying to put things in boxes. Well, my oldest sister, that I had never really been close to, in fact, it had quite a bit of animosity toward her because of our childhood. In our childhood, because my mom had to work so much, she just turned the position of mothering to my oldest sister, who wore it well, but she had no credibility with us younger sisters. And anyway, so we weren't real close, but I went to see her. She'd asked me to come keep her kids because she and her husband were going to a conference. And I got up there, and the first thing she did when they got back, she was so excited and so different from the type of woman, the girl that I had known. She started sharing with me what had been going on in her life with her husband. It had just mirrored mine and my husband's life. They were on the verge of splitting up. They were part of a church that, when they found out their circumstances, had said, y'all need to come to counseling or you need to leave the church. And anyway, and through all of that, she led me to Christ. And once she led me to Christ, she shared with me the exchange life. And everything fell into place for me, where I had lived a life of secrets, so afraid of people knowing who I really was. The shame and the worthlessness, the guilt. Never feeling like I'd ever be enough or could ever be clean enough. All fell away. Instead of if I were to put it this way, instead of a constant trying to turn over a new leaf, I turned over a new life. Mm-hmm. And when I surrendered my life to Christ in salvation and surrender, and totally committed my life to Him and identified was the key, because I had a past I needed to get rid of. And I couldn't, no matter how I tried to hide it, no matter what I did to try to overcome it, nothing was ever enough. And when I gave my life to Christ that day, and I realized that the Father I'd never had always existed. The Father I had never known was always there, and that He was sufficient for everything. And in moments I was healed. In moments my past fell away, because I so embraced being taken out of my biological human life, because that's really how I needed to look at it literally, was being taken out of the life of Adam and put into the life of Christ. Not just the life of Christ, the life of God in Christ. I had a father. I had an older brother. I had a husband. I was transformed. I was transformed instantly, and so many of the things that I had been involved in, apart from my husband and with my husband, really became non-existent. They just fell away also. And so I was blessed to be able to spend that next week with my sister, who, excuse me, had already been through 8 weeks of intense counseling through the Exchange Life, and she was a good student. She was able to walk me through everything in a week, and I was like a sponge. I was just so hungry for a new life and a new beginning, that I was a new creation. All those things that I sat through, all those Sunday school classes and all the children Bibles, scripture learning classes, all the scriptures God brought back up to me that had been so meaningless, they all made sense. And what a blessing that was in 1986. It's almost 30 years ago. Well, I came home from South Carolina visiting my sister to an unsaved husband who had not changed. And wonder upon wonders is that was something I was afraid of, because I'd been such a chameleon. I had been so hyper aware of being concerned about making people happy and trying to meet other people's needs all the time, because I felt like that was meeting my basic need for security and approval. None of that existed anymore. And I came home obviously so desirous that my husband would know these truths. Now we met in church. He wasn't raised in church, but he did attend church. He was from another small town, so we didn't go to school together, but we were in church together like through his high school years, and he had gone through college, whereas I had not. So he also had a background, but David is kind of the opposite of myself in our personalities and our temperaments. The focus of his life compared to the focus of my life, he was, the straight A student. He was like, you had talked about yesterday, Roxanne, about, his parents expected him to achieve things and do well, be so directed, and that was part of what attracted me, was the stability that he had, and the security and the focus. Here I had left a one-woman wrecking ball. That's how I was. I was a one-woman wrecking ball, and it was not just my life. It was the life of my 2 children. It was the relationships I'd been in, just some more the child that I had aborted. The influence as an unbeliever and a heathen, on other people's lives. And I came back completely changed. I was no longer a murderess. I was no longer a thief. I was no longer an adulteress. I was no longer a liar or a gossip or a coveter. Not that I'm a perfect person, but I embraced my perfection in Jesus Christ. I embraced His righteousness as my own righteousness. So I come home, and David has not changed, and he did not like the changes that he saw in me, because obviously it made the vulgarness of his life, I'll put it that way, the darkness of his life. The light that I brought home made his darkness seem darker, and he didn't like that. But 4 years later, he gave his life to Christ. And that one of my fears coming home was, how long will this last? How long will this refreshment really last? How long will I really toe this line? Because I've always started big, and then I stopped. I would go on to that next thing as my interest waned. Well, my interest did not wane, and it's because I came home, I just dove into my Bible studies and community Bible study fellowship, and other things. And there was no, back in 1986, Exchange Life was hardly anywhere, and I just got all the materials that I could to learn all that I could. But anyway, over the next few years, David saw the change in me and ultimately gave his life to Christ. And we were moved to Georgia, where they had an Exchange Life ministry, and he and I both attended conferences. And at a point in our future to that time, he made some confessions to me that were quite revealing, you know. But it was just so sweet, all of it. Really, there was never any. There was never really even any unforgiveness, because the forgiveness had always been there all the time on both of our parts. We found our marriage restored and refreshed, replaced, you know. And, you know, I will say that during those years, those early years, the Exchange Life changed my marriage, because I applied it to everything about my marriage, but I did not apply it to my parenting, to the two children we had at the time. And I continued to parent out of a lot of my flesh patterns, out of a lot of my insecurity, my micromanaging and my controlling, my overprotection. And through that, as especially my oldest daughter really began to struggle in her teenage years. And so this past 30 years of knowing the Exchange Life truths, you know, there have been times where I have gone back into legalism, where I've gone back, because I was a very fearful child. I was always worried about where was food going to come from, you know, the clothes we wore were hand-me-downs from kids I went to school with all the time, you know, just the shame and the fear and the worry and anxiety. And in this time period, we had 3 more children that I did begin to, you know, I began, once David and I were on the same page as far as Christ as life and the identification with Christ and his life to us, for us, as us, you know. I was parenting my 3 younger children this way. My older ones were still in their preteen, and, you know, I just lost their hearts. We as parents had lost their hearts. But as they saw my parenting and mine and David's parenting of our younger children, you know, now they're in their 30s. It took some time. It took forgiveness on their part, but they all have been able to partake of the Exchange Life truths in different ways. I'm still looking and praying toward, you know, Christ's success in their life as their life, as they identify with him and surrender in some areas. But I want to say that, you know, like I had said, you know, the almost 30 years of having the knowledge, the intimate knowledge of Christ as life through the Exchange Life, that I am not who I was. You know, the old is gone, the new has come. That Christ is a solid rock, and all other ground is sinking sand. That the greatest testimony is that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And in these 30 years, that has never changed, though I have changed. I have shifted here and there as I've gone back into fear, or you know, I've fallen back into some micromanaging or controlling aspects that I know I can. He's always brought me back to himself. And none of those are ultimately satisfying. Nothing apart from him. And this summer has really been good. We had I've been blessed to be able to teach the Exchange Life to the ladies at our church, and we've taken a break this summer, but as far as fellowshipping, but God has not been inactive, and this summer has really been another level of learning who Christ is my life, that there is no separation, that the separation comes in that soul part of us, what Watchman Nee calls the soulical part of us, that sometimes when we start walking into the flesh or in the negative things of our life, out of our feelings, out of our emotions, that we are acting as if we are separate from our oneness in Jesus Christ. And it brings me back very quickly to realize that there is no separation. other than what I tend to imagine. 2 Corinthians 10 is a chapter that I really hang on to, that our weapons of warfare are not like the world's, but divine for pulling down strongholds. The vain imaginations and philosophies that make us believe we have a separation from God as we walk in ourselves, but they are against the knowledge of God for us, that we're to take every thought captive to the obedience of Jesus Christ. And this has been the focus that God has brought me to at this season in my life. How many of my thoughts are not captive to Him? How many of my thoughts are actual separation from Him? And that's not a place I ever want to go again. So here I am. I'm a new creation.